All right, hi everyone. Welcome to our live stream of our latest meetup. We're just going to give it a few minutes while people start drifting in. So we've got 40 odd people on the stream already, 160 signed up. So if it's anything, hi everyone. Welcome to. Sorry, I'm just going to pause the video of myself playing 20 seconds delayed, as I told everyone else to do. So yeah, if our RSVP rates are anything to go by, we should get about 60% of you actually dialing in here. So, but even so, there's going to be a good number of people joining in to listen to Peter talk to us all about storytelling. I normally do my spiel at the moment about health and safety, but the good thing about being online is we don't need to do that. So I can just crank straight into it and not waste anybody's time. I would like to introduce Peter to you shortly. I haven't spent a lot of time with Peter. I've met him at a couple of events. We've talked online over Hangouts, and given the RSVP rates, my immediate impression is that everyone else thinks he's worth listening to as well. And I've certainly been really intrigued with his backstory that I'm sure he'll fill you in on, and has got some really useful insights, I think, in terms of the power of how we express ourselves through narrative and story, that I think is super interesting as a product leader, having to influence the hearts and minds of people around us. And as we've talked about in many meetups, it's one of the core skills required of a product leader to be able to convey a message and to change direction of groups of people who may not be willing to change direction potentially, or who may need some incentive or some reason to do that. So this art of storytelling sounds an amazing topic to talk about. And I love the fact that Peter's background takes him from journalism, the ultimate storyteller, through to the work he's doing now, working with companies and helping them to tell better stories. So Peter, thanks very much for offering to speak today. And I'd like to give you an opportunity to say a few words, give us a bit of a backstory as people start to come in. They can hear your dulcet tones introducing yourself.
Okay, well, thanks, Tokes, for that very fulsome and very kind introduction. So I hope I can live up to the billing. I'm really excited to be here talking about storytelling. It's been a big part of my life, and I think that there's some stories land really well, and other stories don't. And so my talk tonight really is looking at some of the failures that I've experienced, as well as the successes, and mapping out my journey is trying to identify, well, why sometimes was it really successful, and why sometimes wasn't it so.
That sounds awesome. Hey, I do realize there is a little bit of housekeeping to remind people of. We decided not to have everybody dialing into the Zoom call and asking questions directly, however attractive that might seem. So we're relying on people, if they're going to be wanting to ask questions, just to type in a question into the YouTube comments section, and I will see that, and Suhil's on there as well. He'll see that, and we'll make sure that that Peter gets those questions through and has a chance to answer them as well. Also, if you have to jump off early, the URL that you're on now will be the recording after the live stream, so you can always come back later and listen to it. So don't be worried about that. And so I think we're just going to kick off. We've got 50 odd people on there now, so that's good. So we should, I think we should keep going. In terms of timing, because I know you all want to get to your dinner and kids and a glass of wine potentially, if you're not already there. We are aiming to wrap up, I would say, around 6:30, 6:45. depending on how many questions there are. Peter's going to be talking for about 40 minutes, but is more than happy for you to interrupt via the comments, and I'll relay them at the right time. So don't feel like you have to wait to do all your questions at the end. If something's not clear to you or you've got some amazing insight, then please type it into the comments, and I'll make sure that it gets through to Peter. So yeah, let's get stuck into it, Peter.
Cool.
I'll let you share your screen and let the festivities begin.
Fantastic. Okay. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. No airani rawa ko no ingarangi hoki oku te puna matua. Ko ipi buvere rawa ko trakaya na waka. Hei Pākehā hau. Karori a hau I te whakapapa ki tēnei whenua o Aotearoa, engari I te pua a hau I raro I te maunga o te kiakia ki Waitaha ki te te Waipunamu. I te pua ki a hau I taha I te awa o Hakatiri ki Waitaha hoki. Ko te tariti o Waitangi toku tūranga waiwai. Ko Fletcher-Dobson toku hapu. Ko Jeff Dobson toku papa. Ko Jill Nealon toku mama. I whānau mai a hau ki Hakatiri, engari te whanganui a tara toku kāinga in ai nei. Ko Peter Fletcher-Dobson toku wingwa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It's a real pleasure for me to speak to you here today, and as the whakatauki ko te kaiaranga tira hei kōrero says, talk is the food of leaders. My introduction was telling you that my ancestors came from England and Ireland on two ships in around the 1870s, and I'm a Pākehā. I grew up in mid-Canterbury under the shadows of Mount Somers by the Ashburton River. My standing stone, my legitimacy for being a Pākehā in Aotearoa is Te Tariti o Waitangi. I'm the son of Jill and Jeff Dobson. I was born in Ashburton, but my home is now Wellington. So into ao Māori, whai kōrero, or oratory, represents the separation of the earth and the sky. It's what allows the sun to shine in. And if a speaker's words are worthy, they can bring listeners from a place of conflict to peace and resolution. For me, the ability to tell stories is arguably the most powerful evolutionary development in humankind, I would say. Stories are absolutely the food of leaders. I believe they're the currency of product leaders. And what I want to share with you this evening is my journey with storytelling across really five key steps. So I want to do a bit of reflection on where I've got to in my journey. I think there's a problem to solve that storytelling can really help with. I want to explore that. I want to explore where all of us could get to and the challenge of getting there. And I want to unpack a key insight that I've come across that I think gives us a way through and a solution that unlocks this. So, starting with a bit of reflection, as Toke said, my journey with storytelling began as a journalist, writing and finding and communicating stories in a very prescribed way. I worked in New Zealand and the UK. In London, I worked as a freelance journalist. This is back in the 90s, basically being a gig economy writer, or as I guess we used to honestly say it, being mostly unemployed. However, when I was employed, I got to write some pretty cool stories and meet some reasonably famous people, some music stars and rock stars, royalty. I even once had a morning tea with Richard Branson. And I'm forever enshrined in history, if you like, covering this story, which is outside Buckingham Palace. It's in 1991, and it's the resignation of this lady, Margaret Thatcher, who's just come in from handing in her notice, so to speak, to the Queen. There's me. Well, you can't actually see me. It's so pixelated in this ancient picture. But I'm standing on a stepladder that I've borrowed from a BBC camera crew, leaning over the heads and shoulders of the Fourth Estate. Obviously, I've picked the wrong side if I wanted to see anything of Margaret Thatcher, so I'm just getting a great view of her husband, Dennis. And she's carefully going out of office after a long and very polarising reign in the UK. This is 1991, so there's no mobile phones. I had to dash off my borrowed stepladder, run to a phone box, phone my story through to the news desk, and then hopefully my words make it into the paper the next day and I get paid. 1991, however, was also a pretty pivotal year in terms of technology, because that very smart chap, Tim Berners-Lee, was beavering away in CERN in Switzerland, creating something that he would later call the World Wide Web. And little did I know that 8 years later, I would be moving from the world of print journalism to working on the internet. And I joined a startup in 1999, which was creating a virtual newscaster.
Television news producers who traditionally feel that front-of-camera people are overpaid egos on sticks saw a ravishing picture of the future today. The world's first virtual newscaster went live on the internet with the arrival of Anna Nova, who's supposed to be a cyberspace cross between Carol Vorderman and Posh Spice.
Anna Nova, good morning.
Morning, Jane. It's a pleasure to be here.
Nice to see you as well.
And the world's first virtual newsreader on the internet has been launched today in London.
Now, a computer-generated character called Anna Nova is set to revolutionise the world of broadcast news.
Okay, so that was Anna Nova. She was the main product of a startup called Anna Nova, set up by us, a bunch of journalists who were otherwise facing redundancy from the UK Press Association. So desperation being the mother of all invention, we partnered with a Scottish animation company who had a text-to-speech engine, and we used that to create Anna Nova, the world's first virtual newscaster. I managed the team behind the talking head, and our job was to find material on the internet, as it was then in 1999, and then make sure that she could pronounce the words and actually appear credible. So you got to remember, these are the days of 64K modems. We actually built Anna Nova in that sort of thumbnail size, so she could fit on a mobile phone, because we thought that's where the internet was going to be heading. And even though video was nowhere near mobile phones in 1999, we were still using WAP. That was sort of our ambition. We had her trawling the internet, but as Google wasn't even a thing then, we had to build our own web search engine to get material. And weirdly, that's what got us acquired by a telco, Orange, for quite a staggering amount in 1999, right at the height of the dot-com bubble. So we're a bunch of journalists suddenly working in technology, and we didn't really know exactly how to operate, as it was very different from how you'd operate in a normal newsroom. We were working with developers and designers, and so we kind of worked out this model of one of us would come up with some product ideas, someone smart and good with Photoshop and other tools would do the designing, and there'd be a dev there that would actually crank out the code and make it work. So it's kind of agile before agile, if you like, even though agile was kind of a thing, we just hadn't heard of it. Anyway, I left the UK in 2007 and came back to Aotearoa, New Zealand with my English family in tow. I worked for Telecom New Zealand, and then joined KiwiBank, where I set up internet and mobile banking, built a number of digital banking products before getting involved in setting up the first fintech accelerator in New Zealand, which was pretty exciting, and saw the birth of companies like Sharesies and Henry and Tapi. I left KiwiBank after being there 12 years, so quite a long stint, to set up my digital consultancy called Atamai, which helps companies with digital transformation. And for the last 2 years, I've been working with a company called BCITO, which helps to train apprentices on their digital transformation. And what I've found is that in any transformation, either working in corporate, trying to transform an idea of a startup into an actual viable company, or trying to help a company that isn't very digital becoming digital, stories are super important. And so one of the areas I've really been focusing on is around storytelling and how we can use that to create impactful change. In 2018, I partnered with a transformation designer called Philippe Colombe from Openfield Consultancy, and together we designed a workshop which is to help businesses and organizations, individuals, to use storytelling to create impactful change. And so we've used that workshop to sort of work across government, startups, commercial organizations, charities, even individuals who want to use storytelling and narrative to create change. And the rest of this talk is really based on the outputs and what we've discovered in that journey. So looking back as a journalist, transitioning into a technologist, if you like, I was moving essentially, I feel, from one storytelling mode to another. I was definitely moving into that grey area between technology and the business, and a bit like any newspaper reporter who's looking for great stories to pass on to their readers. I was looking for great business opportunities to pass on to delivery teams, and vice versa. I was looking for great technology opportunities to then sell into the business. And that's pretty much how I carved out a career, by inspiring stakeholders to fund products or ventures. And I found unconsciously I was quite good at spinning a tale and pitching. But sometimes my stories worked really well, and sometimes they didn't. And that puzzled me and began to eat away at me, which is sort of why I've had this real focus on why is that, and is there a way to unlock or discover a framework that can maybe make it less of an unpredictable event as to why some stories work. An example that sort of comes to mind is when I was at Kiwibank. So this is in 2007 when I joined there, and I'd moved from telecom, and as I say, when I was working in Ananova in Leeds in the north of England, we worked in this sort of quasi-agile way. And then I came back to New Zealand and found that both in telecom, where I was running the online team there, and in Kiwibank, they had this completely different way of delivering software called Waterfall. And it was, it seemed to me to be a very, how can I put it, overburdened way, in that you had these people called business analysts who came up with requirements that then handed it over to a dev, and who would build some stuff, and then a tester would test it, and then we'd hand it over to the business. And to my way of thinking, it didn't fit with the way I was used to operating, which was a far more, working with a team of sort of empowered individuals. We were just OpExing everything and delivering in iterations. And so when I discovered that there was a methodology called Agile, which had a lot of those features in it around empowered teams and transparency, I got pretty interested. So I thought, well, I've got to bring this into Kiwibank. And I thought, well, the people that I was partnering with to deliver products were my colleagues in IT. And I thought, well, this will be fantastic. And so I went to sell in, I guess, that to Kiwibank. And I'll just leave that there, because it's a kind of story that I'm going to come back to as I go through my conversation with you. But fair to say, my stories didn't exactly land on fertile ground with my IT colleagues. So let's hold my frustration for a moment at my agile stories falling like dried autumn leaves on the cold and unfertile ground of Kiwibank IT, and look at what we're here to look at this evening, which is, as a product leader, incorporating storytelling. And I guess I want to ask the question, and if we were in the room at Trade Me. This would be the interactive bit, I guess, of what is the mission of being a product leader. And so because it's a bit stilted, I'm going to provide the answer, but as Toke said, I'm happy for people to interrupt and debate either in their presentation or afterwards. But I actually think, and this may sound a bit trite, that their mission is obviously to build the best product possible, right? That's what product leaders are there to do. Now, to do that, the mission, I guess, is accomplished by finding really great problems, customer problems to solve and to validate. And from that, you create a great product vision. From that, you need to inspire somebody to normally fund your product or your idea. And then after that, you need to actually inspire a team to build the thing. Now, in smaller organizations or startups, you might be the product builder as well as the product visionary, but you still have to inspire someone to actually then fund your venture or your product. Normally in bigger organizations, as a product leader, you're probably not doing the doing, more of the inspiring. And this is where stories, I think, are a critical part of being able to do our jobs as product leaders. Stories are a way to inspire, absolutely, and you definitely want to be inspiring your stakeholders. There's a whole ton of research and some really good TED Talks which show that the power of emotion over reason in decision making. You can present all the data and all the rational arguments in the world, but people have generally made up their minds based on their gut feel, on their emotion. You need your customers and your colleagues to buy into your vision. Ideally, it's supported by rational argument, but there's a huge emotive context. I guess as Maya Angelou says, people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. So stories are kind of like the way that I believe gives you a bit of a superpower in accomplishing your mission as a product leader. But to unpack that a bit, I just want to look at why and how important stories are to human beings. So I'm going to go a little bit of a trawl through history. So the best story around at the moment, I believe, is WandaVision. And again, I'm happy to take counter arguments to that. But if we start with that today, there are also some pretty good stories in the past. William Shakespeare, the Bard, he was quite good at knocking out a good story of lots of rising and falling of tension and love and death and betrayal. If we go even a bit further back to the stories of the Anglo-Saxons or the Icelandic sagas, we're now sort of 700 Christian era, and maybe going even back further than that, 2,000 years ago to the Bible. Obviously enduring stories, still around today, still influencing people, still driving behaviors. Maybe even go back a bit further than that, 1,000 years before that, when the Polynesians were crossing the Pacific, bringing their stories of Maui, the demigod, of how humans controlled the sun, found fire, became masters of nature. Even before then, 3000 BCE, the Epic of Gilgamesh, so a Sumerian half mortal, half god. A lot of the stories from this amazing epic actually appear in the Bible, such as the Great Flood. It was also a big influence on Homer in writing the Odyssey. But to go back to the oldest story that we know of that's still being told today, we have to go way, way, way back to 14,000 years ago. This story is Rainbow Serpent. It's a key dreaming story for the Aboriginal people in Australia. It tells the story of the creation of plants and animals, and it's been passed down in variations across various Aboriginal subcultures since 12,000 BC. Now, in some of the stories, it tells the tale of how Rainbow Serpent was searching for its own people, So this giant serpent crawling across the Australian desert, raising up hills and gouging out rivers as it went. Obviously quite tiring work. It slept a lot, and one day while it was slumbering away in the midst of a rainstorm, two brothers came looking for shelter, sort of tapped on Rainbow Serpent's nose and said, is there any shelter? Rainbow Serpent, in that very reptilian, obliging way, sort of opened its mouth and said, sure, step in. So the brothers stepped into Rainbow Serpent's mouth, and of course Rainbow Serpent closed its jaws and the brothers were swallowed. Now eventually the people that the brothers came from noticed they were missing and sent out a bit of a rescue party. Not hard to find Rainbow Serpent with these massive gouges all over the countryside. And they found, again, this sleeping giant. They realised that Rainbow Serpent had swallowed their brothers, and so in rage, they slit open the side of Rainbow Serpent to free the two brothers. Out flew a couple of lorikeets. The brothers had been magically transformed while they're inside Rainbow Serpent. Rainbow Serpent woke up at this stage, probably for the pain of being incised, and enraged, sort of raced around, chasing the brothers, throwing stones and generally causing chaos and mayhem. As the people ran, they were transformed into plants, animals, kangaroos, wombats, the panoply of animals and plants that inhabit the Australian continent. Rainbow Serpent eventually became tired of chasing all these people and plants and transforming things, and decided to just lope off to the sea. And as it hit the sea, the sun took pity on Rainbow Serpent and scooped it up into the sky, and now every time there's a rainbow, that's Rainbow Serpent sitting up there, now safe from the harassment of humans and other beings looking down on us. So it's quite a tale, and I really enjoy telling it and thinking about it, and it's obviously pretty successful to still being retold 14,000 years later. It's a story that shows the kinship of people and animals and plants in the world. And it works as a really good story on a number of levels. First, depending on the telling, obviously, there's a good bit of action and suspense. The serpent is literally a cliffhanger, and there's that classic monster chase scene, beloved of movies. Second, it's kind of funny, when the brothers are turned into birds, and the serpent is a sort of sleepy but grumpy reptile we all instinctively fear and find funny at the same time, a bit like Jabba the Hutt or maybe Benedict Cumberbatch as a dragon. Third, and probably most importantly, the story builds empathy. And, I get a real buzz from the ending of humans, animals, and plants all being connected into this great web of life. The serpent sort of rehabilitated up above as a really cool rainbow. And the listener comes away with feeling that they're part of something bigger than us. And it speaks to where we all originally came from, our kinship with planet Earth. What I've described are actually the chemical reactions in our brains that a good story has to hit. Rainbow Serpent has lasted so long because it absolutely nails the story model on a chemical level. So human beings are wired for stories through the chemicals in our brain. Dopamine is triggered by cliffhangers and suspense. Oxytocin is that warm feeling you get from empathy when you're bonding with a story or an idea or you're trusting in something. Endorphins are triggered by laughter. And when we laugh, we become more relaxed and actually more creative. There's also cortisol and adrenaline. You don't want too many of those in a story because they're quite jarring. But if you're wanting to make something edgy, particularly some of those edgy jokes, you can actually trigger a bit of endorphins from that ride with some cortisol and adrenaline. Too much and your audience just gets annoyed and intolerant. So human beings are wired for stories, and it's been proven, I think, by stories that have lasted 14,000 years. But what exactly is a story? Well, stories are they are self-contained. They have an arc. They've got a beginning and an end, and they run to what's a pretty standard pattern. These nursery rhymes, Snow White, Little Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel, they have very familiar patterns. Joseph Campbell, famous analyst of stories, said there were only two, the hero's myth and the stranger comes to town. More recently, data scientists at the University of Vermont have put 1,700 stories through a sentiment analysis using big data and found that there are only 6 types of story arc model. So there's a very limited way to craft a tale that works with human beings. There's a few examples that I've sort of pulled out. There's the famous 3-act, which is Shakespeare uses it, Pixar uses it a little bit. There's Give Them Something to Cheer For in 7 Steps, another Pixar one, which is a fantastic way of deconstructing movies. Just about every single movie runs to the 7-step process. Star Wars, once there was a simple farm boy on Tatooine. Every day they tended to the water plants until one day their family was killed by the Empire. Because of that, Luke had to meet Obi-Wan Kenobi in the Force. Because of that, Luke got to meet Han Solo and Chewbacca in the Rebellion, until finally Darth Vader kills Obi-Wan, which looks like a defeat, but actually it allows Luke to blow up the Death Star. And ever since then, Luke has been training to be a Jedi. You can pretty much take any movie, particularly sci-fi, run it through that model, and bang, 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 it hits those 7 steps. And the 9 steps to glory, it's pretty much the 7 steps, but bookended by having a bit of an impactful message and a real emotive ending. So only so many ways to tell a story. And these are great for playing around with movies and maybe creating a story to amuse friends or whatever. But are they useful in business? Well, I found a model that takes the great parts of those, but which strips down a strategy for absolutely business use. It's from a really smart guy, Martin Weigel. The URL's down there, and I'll certainly make that available. He's got a 5-step model which allows you to break down any strategy into a story that you can then relay back to your stakeholders or your team. It basically goes from reflection, where we are today, ambition, the tomorrow we could have, the jeopardy, the challenge we have to overcome, and the need for action and change, hope, the insight that gives us a way through, and the solution, the idea that unlocks this. He uses the example of the Battle of Waterloo, Battle of Trafalgar rather. So a bit of an old one, 1805, but I'll go through it just to show you how the model works. It also really works really well. I've seen it done with Netflix's business model. But for the Battle of Trafalgar, so where are we today? For Nelson and the British, they're facing the combined Franco-Spanish fleet. What's their ambition? Well, we've got to destroy the enemy fleet. What's the challenge? Well, they're massively outnumbered, and the real jeopardy is if they lose, that's the end of British rule, and I guess they're drinking French wine and eating cheese. The hope is, though, that the French gunners are less well-trained than our more experienced captains and gunners. And the idea that unlocks this, well, this was in Nelson's actual words, and the night before the battle, he was at dinner, drew on a napkin a horizontal line and 2 vertical lines, and basically rewrote the way that naval warfare happened, where normally it was 2 lines of ships blowing hell out of each other. He just drove straight through the middle and caused chaos. So that model is fantastic for encapsulating a strategy, a business strategy, a war strategy, if you like, and can create a great story that you can use in business. And stories are great, and if you hit those brain chemical reactions, you will absolutely nail the telling. But there's actually something more important than stories, and this is the key point that I want to get to. And a lot of the time we confuse it with stories, and that's narrative. So remember my failure earlier on with trying to sell Agile into the Kiwibank IT. I was telling the wrong stories because I didn't understand the context of where those developers and other IT folk were at. And this is where understanding narrative, the environment that you and the people you influence inhabit, becomes so important because it gives context. to those that live in this environment. So going back to those fairy stories that have lasted for hundreds of years, Snow White, Little Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel, stories like this are self-contained. They have an arc, a beginning and an end. They are definitely timeless tales, handed down from caregivers and parents to children for generations. And I guess the question is, why are they so enduring? What is about those stories? Yes, they are, great, well-formed stories, but why do they keep being retold? Why does Rainbow Serpent endure? Well, they do so because they actually form part of a narrative. So these stories are part of the narrative that the world is a dangerous place. And they are told by parents and caregivers to children in a very innocuous, innocent way, to basically sow the seed that outside the family circle, there may be some people or some things that aren't as kind and benevolent as your parent or your caregiver, and to be cautious that life isn't the soft and warm place that the home might be. Too often we confuse stories and narrative, and this is the jeopardy and the challenge, because the narrative is the glue that connects stories and gives them context and meaning. So it's like a living mosaic. It's open-ended. The world is a dangerous place, has no beginning, and it has no end. It connects the audience to a persistent theme. A narrative depends really on how actively the listener, the respondent, chooses to engage or not. So let's imagine that you're a populist politician trying to establish the narrative that immigrants are dishonest and dangerous. Well, people can either choose to engage with that. They can start locking their doors, they can start keeping their kids away from immigrant friends, or they can do the opposite. They can start telling stories about how great immigrants are. They can have, try different meals from different parts of the world. And this will determine whether the narrative becomes effective or not. Now, John Hagel, who's a big brain in the world of narrative and storytelling from Deloitte's Centre of the Edge, he describes a narrative as a thematic ecology of related contextual stories that inform and define one's perspective. So the key bit out of that is they inform and define one's perspective when you're inside that narrative. Now, the problem for both, I think, society and product leaders is that we're overwhelmed with stories. In the world, in our communities, we have real-time social media, 24-hour news, websites, blogs. We're in work cultures where there are entrenched beliefs. Anecdotes can become facts, can become, this is the way we do things here. All of these compete for our attention, and they create a deafening noise. Narratives are so powerful because they can help to understand and explain. They create a framework for meaning. They help to focus our attention. They help us to make sense of the noise. They build an understanding of the world around us. Even at a personal level, narrative can help convey and what's important to us and speak to our values. So we tend to like and follow people either in workplace situations or in the world around us who share our narrative. People whose values and vision, perspectives match our own. And this bubble is really amplified by algorithms, particularly, and obviously in social media. The filter bubble distorts our view of reality, and we can kind of get stuck in this loop of just reinforcing feedback. You can keep complaining about that populist politician on Twitter in your filter bubble, and you're just violently agreeing with each other. I've tried as an experiment following people that I don't agree with on Twitter. I don't. If you haven't tried it, you should try it. It's really irritating. You end up sort of skipping over basically what they're saying, and if you try and engage, they tend to block you or skip over what you're saying too. which I can understand. And it's the same working in a digital product environment. When we don't see a wide spectrum of humanity, we can lose empathy for people whose experience is very different from ours. And this is obviously where, design thinking, customer-centric delivery can really, really helps. But we are all inhabiting our own narratives. And the danger is being trapped in this filter bubble because it makes us feel safe. It's non-threatening. It ensures that incoming information is proving us right or reinforcing our perception. And the challenge is obviously to step outside of that. If we're trapped in a filter bubble, it makes it really hard for new narratives to motivate us, even when it would improve our health, relationships, prosperity, environment. And we're seeing this playing out in COVID New Zealand right now with conspiracy theories. And this is because the speed at which information travels now doesn't really allow for fact checking. And narratives don't need to rely on facts or truth to expand. Perceptions, as we're seeing, can be treated like reality, and the damage can literally last for years. Creating an effective narrative is really about breaking down those filter bubbles and reaching out to different audiences. And this can be at a society level or at a business level and talking about a product. So there are millions of storytellers everywhere. And you have to remember, a story is a one-way street. There's one voice, it's the storyteller. It tells you the way it is. The narrative is different because it's a dialogue. So an initiator may start a narrative. The world is a dangerous place that has room for many voices. And the challenge is that once the narrative is out there, the initiator has no control over it. It really is a two-way street in a dialogue where you've got respondents. These can be active storytellers. They could be passive audience members. They could even be counter-initiative initiators who are sending out stories that go against that narrative. You can't control the narrative. You can just dialogue with it. Now, the thing that unlocks this power of narrative and I think helps us to be able to use it to create amazing stories that can create impact in our world as product leaders is this framework. There are 4 key parts that a narrative needs. So I'm going to run through those pretty quickly to give you a solution for being able to unleash your storytelling. First of all, a narrative, it has to be authentic. I've made up a word there called truthful because, as I say, and as we can see with what's happening with some of the narratives that are current now, it doesn't necessarily have to be truthful, as in the real truth. It just has to be to appear so full of truths. We can see that. We've seen it in anti-vaxxing. We've seen it in QAnon, fake news, but it has to be credible. So you have to believe that where that narrative is being generated from, that it reflects the values of the initiator. It's really difficult and expensive to maintain an inauthentic narrative. Some companies have tried it. BP tried it after a massive oil spill called Deepwater. They invented a brand called Beyond Petroleum. So now we're over that stuff. While the beaches, bird life, and people's lives were being destroyed, they were trying to move the conversation on, and absolutely no one bought it. Even with all their wealth and ability to create a narrative through marketing. It also needs to be vulnerable because human beings are fundamentally imperfect beings, and human beings relate to that which is imperfect. If it sounds too good to be true, we become quite skeptical. It needs to feel real. So, this image taken from Greenpeace, obviously around palm oil and deforestation in Indonesia. That's the facts behind it are, shocking. Indonesia home to 10 to 15% of known all plants and mammals. There were fires in 2015 that affected millions of people. That might have caused 100,000 premature deaths. All these are great facts, but it's that image that that sticks in people's mind, particularly when if you're familiar with that Greenpeace campaign, which actually stopped a whole bunch of companies like Nestle using palm oil. They created a really effective narrative. Narrative has to be relatable. There has to be a shared purpose. People want to know that that with that narrative, you're kind of walking hand in hand to achieve a shared purpose, that you're working together. The example I use here is Patagonia, the clothing company. So that was set up as a business to inspire and implement solutions to the environment crisis. They used a great marketing tool, putting a full-page ad in the New York Times on Black Friday, basically saying, "Don't buy this jacket." Trying to change and influence the narrative around consumerism. That Black Friday is a day when I worship the consumer as God and go and spend a small fortune on things that are now heavily discounted. They're saying, don't buy from us. We're not into that. We don't buy into that rampant consumerism. And their sales tripled during this time to 600 million based on that, because a lot of people bought into, if I'm going to buy something, I'm going to buy it from this shop, and I'm going to listen to what they're saying. There needs to be a call to action, and that can be mental, emotional, physical, economic. Maybe there are new facts to be shared. Maybe respondents have new feelings they want to share in stories to drive this narrative. Maybe they actually physically change their behavior, or they use their wallet as a way of influencing it. Nike with the Just Do It campaign, absolutely nailed the call to action. At first, 30 years ago, this was launched by a very blurry picture there from a TV ad of an 80-year-old marathon runner who had put on some Nike shoes and was running across the Golden Gate Bridge. And the narrative was, you bring your attitude, and we'll catch you out with the best shoes possible. And you can getting off the couch. We'll help you do that. And then they pivoted with Black Lives Matter. And they put Colin Kaepernick, the NFL player who wouldn't stand for the American anthem at NFL games because white police officers were killing black men across America. And Nike took the really polarizing and brave step, I would say, of putting his face as this is now what Just Do It means. It means that there's no excuse for inaction. It's not just about physical action. There's something bigger than just sport and getting fit. And this, I guess, takes the narrative to a new place. And finally, somewhat counterintuitively, in a narrative, there needs to be a counterpoint. You need to have opposing voices. There needs to be that black versus white, that versus evil. The world is a dangerous place. That can be and is enriched by people debating as to, well, things have got better or they haven't or not. Resistance, our laziness against Just Do It. This contrast, and I think in a product world, the narrative of the world is a dangerous place. The tension in there is of course will be eaten by an evil being. In business, it's maybe touching on that anxiety of being eaten by a competitor, and I've certainly used that to some success in getting some things bought into by stakeholders. Sometimes fear can be a motivator. So narratives, rounding out this presentation, they inform and define one's perspective. It gives you an organizing principle that allows you to send out a coherent signal. It allows you to create contrast, create context, and create new meaning. In this presentation, I've been going through, I guess, using this model to say, well, for me, my journey has been, why did some stories work well and why didn't they? Where I wanted to get to, and where I think we all want to get to, is, we want to make hugely impactful and very successful stories. However, I think the jeopardy is that we confuse stories and narratives, or we don't understand the narrative when we're telling our stories. For me, the hope is that as human beings, we're hardwired for stories. So if you get the story model right and you hit those brain chemicals, you can't lose. But if you're doing it within the power of a narrative and in that right context, then you're absolutely off to the races. And just bring it back to my story and my challenge with those developers and the IT people at KiwiBank. The challenge was that I didn't understand the narrative that they were inhabiting. Their narrative was, we build centers of technology excellence. That's what they were about. I'm coming in saying, hey, let's bring customer in and work more with business, and we'll create, more customer-centric products. And for better or for worse, it's neither good nor bad, I guess. They were thinking about technical debt, and the reason the moment that I truly understood this was when we didn't get a whole bunch of features, but they did a fantastic .NET upgrade, and they hadn't been prioritized at all. And I guess that was the evidence that I had failed. So just rounding out this presentation. It's know thy narrative and then improve on it. There are some questions that I think are worth pondering as a product leader. What is the narrative you are wanting to influence? What makes it so authentic and relatable? Where's that call to action? Can you find who the initiators are? And this could be persona work. Who started this? And who are the respondents that are continuing it? And how can you dialogue with them? What stories would you create to amplify or counter that narrative? So, he rangi tā mata whaiti, he rangi tā mata whānui. A person with narrow vision has restricted horizon. A person with wide vision has plentiful opportunities. It's my belief that that combination of powerful stories, but done within the context of understanding a narrative, gives you that wide vision, and you will have plentiful opportunities. So, kia ora koutou. Thanks for listening to me.
Peter, that was great. And I know it's always hard doing a presentation in a sound bubble, but I'd like to give you the applause of, I'm sure, the people listening back through my voice, and so thank you for that. I had a couple of reflections. I don't know if people want to put some questions in the comments. They're free to, obviously. I had two thoughts. First thought was, I love that you use the word product leader as the collective term for people leading product. I've been trying to influence that for what seems like a long time. So I'm glad that someone else is using that collective term. So thank you. I also recognized that there's two situations you might find yourself in. One is having to understand a narrative that exists that you have maybe very little control over. Maybe it's part of the culture and the DNA of the company you're working within, or the leaders of the company that you're working alongside. But then there are other situations where you actually need to create or possibly change the narrative. And you mentioned not being able to change a narrative, but in other cases, maybe needing to create new ones. So I'm wondering whether you can talk about the relationship product leaders might find themselves in with an existing or a new narrative.
Yeah, and I think that's so it's understanding the context, isn't it? And I guess my example of where I failed, while it wasn't it was where I failed with KiwiBank IT was obviously not being able to trace back. So what was driving their behaviour? Why were they so resistant to when you think about it, if you're in business, you're just trying to create customer value, and I guess where I had missed was now I would sit back and go, okay, that story didn't work, and I've done this a number of times. So I think it was a pretty good story. When I tell it to other people, they get inspired. When I tell it to these people, they don't. So it's landing in the wrong context. I haven't understood the narrative. So what is it? Am I not being authentic? Are they going, and that could have been part of it. Okay, Peter's not a dyed-in-the-wool tech guy. he doesn't get what we're about. Maybe there wasn't that credibility there. And I think using that framework to be able to unpack, it helps you to then gain a greater empathy for the people that you're trying to tell that story to.
Yeah, and that classic change of difference in narrative between technologists and product people is one that we come across all the time. And it's going to be hard work trying to change their reality. It's more about empathy than trying to make them change their mind about how they see the world. Yeah,
it is. But I mean, I guess it's I've had you have similar challenges. There's always that balance in creating product. Of you've got I guess you have the business vision and drive of wanting to create these amazing things, and then you've got the people who have to build, maintain, look after it, make sure that there's not technical debt, that it's secure and safe, and that classic tension that happens. If you can, where it's worked really well for me is when I've been able to create that vision and that product vision that brings everyone along, and so you're actually doing something that is from a technical point of view, it's probably getting rid of some legacy stuff by improving some systems, and they get to do some cool stuff by solving some really cool technical problems. At the same time, you're delivering a whole bunch of business value, and being able to bring along the whole team on that journey. You need to understand, so how do you set the narrative for the team? And that's certainly, one of the government departments that we worked with, they were, this particular team was putting in a new system, and they were a new team, so they didn't have credibility in the organisation, and they were really struggling to be able to sell it into the rest of the organisation. And it took going through the session of sort of unpacking, because you come in with, well, we're doing these things, and how can this be going wrong, and it just makes sense, and why don't they listen, and why don't they understand? And after a while of unpacking it and running some stories through of, well, how would you unpack this narrative? So where are your stakeholders actually? Where are their minds at? And what are some of the things that could trigger that? It was, I think it was revealing for us all. How if you go through that exercise, you can actually you really understand then what you're about, and then you can start to move the message to match in with different types of narratives.
Yeah, I got Anthony Marta online who's sort of unpicking this a little bit further and asking whether the suggestion is, can you leverage individual stories to unpick the narrative you want to change, or is it about recreating a whole new narrative? And further, I was thinking that classic one where the narrative of a technologist might be different to the narrative of a product person. I feel like there's this hierarchy of narratives, perhaps, where both of your narratives make sense within the broader narrative of the business, and whether there's something in terms of using that to make you both right.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's valid. I think that so you can use stories to try and alter a narrative. You obviously have to have your those stories have to be geared to have all those key component parts. But you're right. It's like it's there is a risk of kind of boiling the ocean. You keep going higher and higher and higher until you get to we just want to do good, and it's not really a narrative because it doesn't have those. It's just too high and too broad, and no one wants to go to work and be a dick, to quote Trade Me's one of their principles. But I guess it's finding that the right layer where you can go. We can that will help to reinforce the vision of where we're all wanting to go, or it can bring everyone along. And so you may tell different stories to different audiences, which happens a lot, doesn't it? When you're talking to business stakeholders, it's generally less of the technical and the detail, and more of the here's what the future could look like from a customer's perspective. And I think you still need to carry that through when you're talking to technologists, obviously. But but there can be different flavors because you're understanding, well, I'm moving from the narrative that we're all in is to, how do we make this business really successful? How do we make the waka go faster? And all those great things. But then when you're talking to one group, you have to understand, well, okay, so I'm talking to people that are going to have to support and maintain the systems that we put in there. So, where are they coming from? And it might be that, we want to have the best tech shop going. And what does that mean? And then how can you leverage that to say, well, yeah, this is all about being the best tech shop and delivering the best customer experience. And this is how we do it.
Mm. I think there's a lot of people who might say or think, and Sue will ask a question along this lines that, I'm not a very good storyteller, right? I get to the punchline too quick. I'm not very good with words. So I can't spin a yarn like Peter does. Have you got any, like tips for people who might feel that they're not quite ready to tell a Snow White story in front of the execs? What's some small baby steps people can start taking and thinking about?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a classic introvert, and I'm definitely not an extrovert that thrives off lots of people, but I really enjoy public speaking. I really enjoy telling stories. But everyone, if you can talk, you can tell a story, and as I was sort of saying in the presentation, we're hardwired as human beings to receive stories. We're also hardwired to give them. It doesn't actually mean that you can go from being very anxious about standing up in front of a crowd of people or in front of a bunch of execs in a couple of days and really nail it. Particularly for like pitching, there is an art to it, but it's frameworks and it's also practice. I think it was one of the US presidents, Woodrow Wilson, was saying, if you want me to speak for 10 minutes, I'll be back to you in like 4 weeks or something. If you want me to speak for 45 minutes, I can do it tomorrow. And so it is that. It's just like any skill or any art, but the fact that we have those chemicals in our brain that we know what makes us feel good, and hopefully I've outlined a bit of a framework for how to piece together a story. You can take that and you just practice and polish it.
Yeah, I love it. I love the fact that you've given some guidance around that arc and the way in which to frame that arc, and that it's not enough to go into a meeting and say, I think we should build X. You've got to do a little bit more work around how you pitch that idea, right?
Totally, and also, it's while so data drives everything. I'm a absolute firm believer that's our world. And that's what we build our products on. That's what our businesses sit on. But it's pretty clear to me that people don't make decisions based on data, because I've given some really rational arguments for why we should be doing this thing and no one's into it. And then you spin an anecdote and boom, they're there with you on the journey. And it's that emotional thing. It's a bit like hiring people. It's as soon as people walk in the door, we've got that human reaction. In 30 seconds, we've summed them up. And the rest of it is about either reinforcing or it's pretty rare to have a bit of a turnaround. Sometimes it happens because we're imperfect, but certainly I found that and there's a whole bunch of really good TED Talks around how it's emotions that sort of drive decisions rather than rational data-based. We think we're making a data-based decision, but we've actually made the decision with our gut, and we're just using the data to reinforce that position. I think a lot of the time.
But I think if you combine data. Data might be the thing that gives you what's that sort of disillusionment bit that you had in your arc, right? Like that may be a good. We use that to good effect to convince Xero powers to be that we needed to move to Amazon because this is how many customers we're adding. If we add any more, we're not going to be able to. We'll fall over. And here's the data.
Yep.
And the hope was that if we moved, we can make it better, right? And so I think data is a really good reinforcer of a story.
Yeah, and definitely, you have to have that. It's if ideally you've got a there's a rational fact-based platform or foundation to your story because you don't want to be spinning yarns that aren't factually true when you're trying to pitch especially in a business. But I guess what I'm saying is it's not enough to just provide the data and the numbers. You've got to get people's emotions to inspire.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I'm conscious of the time. I've got one more question from Ramanan, who's asking around whether you think there's any good tools for delivering a story. Do you recommend slides? Is it enough just to be a good orator? Like, what do you think helps?
I think tailor it to what you're most comfortable with. I mean, use slides tonight. I think images can really help. Having it, I think your ideas and a structure sort of mapped out. And I unashamedly used the 5-step story model for this presentation. And so it's and sometimes you will not have you'll not have the opportunity to use tech. So you're really just having to talk. And I think it's understanding what's the core messages that you want to get over, which is why that 5-step model is so useful, because you can pretty much have it on a bit of paper or cards in your hand, or even remember it in your head, and then you can just build on it. And if you've got the opportunity to use rich multimedia, create videos and what have you, you can. Or if you're just standing in front of a group of people, giving your story, you've got a framework there that can take you through it.
Yeah, nice. Hey, I think that's a good place to leave it. We've just hit the hour. That's a nice time frame to keep to. Hey, once again, thank you so much for a really inspiring talk, and one that's got me thinking about ways in which I deliver messages, and thinking about where I'm, who I'm talking to and how. So yeah, it's been great. So thank you very much, Peter. Any final thoughts?
I just I think the more people, the more storytelling, the more you investigate storytelling, and particularly narratives, the more it takes you out of your zone and your filter bubble. And I've just found it extremely enlightening, both on a personal and a business level. And I just go forth and tell some great stories.
Okay. All right. Thanks again, Peter, and look forward to continuing this chat over a coffee or a lunch sometime soon.
Sounds good.
So yeah, thank you very much.
Cool.
All right. Thanks everyone else for being online and listening. Good turnout, and we'll be back in a few weeks. Ciao.